program you've been waiting for. I am delighted to welcome back Reverend Dr. Daniel O'Connell, who comes from several generations of Disciples of Christ ministers. As a Unitarian Universalist minister, Daniel served churches in Danbury, Connecticut, St. Louis, Missouri, and Houston, Texas. He served on various regional and national denominational boards with distinction. Especially notable in his 20-plus career in the ministry, he performed the first Midwest public gay wedding in 2003, and he filed the ceremony with the St. Louis City Clerk. In Houston, he merged one strong and two weak churches into one church with 3 locations. He also co-founded the UU Voice for Justice, a rapid response social justice network. Please welcome Father O'Connell, who will talk about, did I say that? Self-made man. Welcome.
Thank you, Bets. And I am a father of 2 adult children. And in fact, I was all set to do a Father's Day service last year, and I came down with COVID. So there you go. Okay. It is good to be back with you all. Good to see you. Thanks for having me back. It's always a pleasure. So let me ask you a question. When you were younger, maybe had a little bit wider stretch of an imagination, did you ever wonder what it would be like to live for a while as the opposite sex? That whole phrase, opposite sex, it kind of suggests binary in terms of gender. One of the very first things we notice about a person, the very first thing, is their appearance, their gender. Like it or not, research suggests that your appearance affects how people think of you. Like, just instantly, whether or not you're trustworthy, whether or not you're promiscuous or powerful. Is a person dressed that you're just now looking at, never seen them before, are they in a suit or a really nice dress? Is it fashionable? Does it fit? Is the person dressed in rags that seem to waft an odor that's not pleasant? Do they appear to be wearing clothes of the opposite sex? Now, especially for younger people, there is social pressure to dress in particular ways. Why? So it's easier to figure out what gender this person is. You may have seen sometimes new parents feel pressure to dress their new baby in pink or blue so that people won't use the wrong pronouns, saying, "Isn't he cute?" when referring to little Abigail, or "What a lovely daughter" when referring to little Henry. We want to spare someone's feelings for having guessed wrong, and we don't want to have to keep correcting people. Of course, the babies, they don't care. It's the adults. I think that's why some parents put earrings on infants' ears, so that you can instantly guess it's a girl. Later, when our children are older, we can try giving blocks and trucks to girls, and we can give dolls to boys, but even little children, most of them, begin to cling to things that we traditionally associate with either boys or girls. The problem, of course, is that most of us are not completely stereotypical in anything, much less some hand-me-down ideal of masculine and feminine. Not only that, but while we may be classified as boys or girls when we are children, after we hit puberty, maybe again later in life, we may have to think and rethink about the difference between sex and gender. So I'm referring to sex as the equipment, let's say, that we were originally born with, and gender as the expression of our identity later in life when we get to choose. Another useful word in addition to sex and gender is persona. I use this word to mean the mask that we present to the world. You get up, you're going to go to that job interview, you got your persona right there, you're ready. That's your persona. It's who we want to be seen as. Now, figuring out really quickly, almost instantly, someone's sex or gender is usually a calculated guess we do without even thinking about it. Most of us usually dress and act in particular ways in order to make it easier for other people strangers even, to figure this out about who we are. Now, when we can't figure it out instantly, for some of us, we quickly feel stymied. We don't know how to act or what to say. Things are made a little easier for us due to the ongoing social realization that sex and gender and persona can all be separated, but this is fairly recent. Some folks say they are non-binary. They don't feel a binary definition of equating sex, biological sex, with gender expression. That doesn't really make sense to them for who they feel that they are. And a few years ago, we began to see this on, of all places, email signatures, right? So he, him, they, or she, her, they, or just them, they, or there are other variations, of course. And in a way, it's also a way for us people who are cisgendered, who are living out the gender that we were born with, to be more welcoming of transgender people, so that we say, hey, we've got pronouns too, but we honor and respect what pronouns you want to use. So all this is like, it seems new in some ways, especially if you're older like me. We try and make progress. We try to acknowledge the reality that gender isn't binary, that not only do transgender people exist in our friends and family and kinship circles, they have always existed, even if we didn't talk about it 50 years ago. But not being instantly recognizable as male or female is dangerous. If people can't figure out your gender, they quickly freeze. As author Nora Vincent puts it, if they don't know what sex you are, they literally don't know how to treat you. They don't know what language to speak, how close they can come to you physically, whether or not they should smile, how they should smile. And then there are the stories, where usually a woman takes on a man's persona, and I think particularly of Yentl and Mulan. So two young women, different stories, who felt by circumstance that they had to live as a man, in speech, in deed, in dress, all of it. Now, if you've seen the movies, you know that the protagonist, a young woman, is able to keep up the persona of a young man for quite a while. But even then, someone of the opposite sex usually begins to suspect that things aren't quite what they seem. In Yentl's case, she wants to study the Torah, the Hebrew scriptures, and in the story, women weren't allowed to do that then. This is 1906 in Poland. She falls in love with a fellow student, awkward, who begins to fall for her, but he represses it. In the case of Mulan, in the Disney story, her lame father, who's really old, is called up as a volunteer to help protect China from the invading Hun army. She knows her aging father will be killed if he goes to war, so she cuts her hair short, she steals his armor and sword, goes in his place, changes her name to Ping, and joins the army. She falls in love with her platoon leader and has to keep her feelings to herself. But she can tell her platoon leader probably has the same feelings for her. And toward the end of the film, of course, Mulan is discovered. And one of the military higher-ups demands the traditional penalty for dressing as the wrong gender, especially in the military. The traditional penalty is death. Fortunately, the platoon leader selects banishment instead, and then the movie can continue in order for Mulan to save all of China, because this is a Disney movie, and that's how it works out. Now, in some states in the United States, cross-dressing was illegal as late as the 1970s, and now, of course, Tennessee has a state law against cross-dressing on public property. This is just the tip of the iceberg. 14 other states have similar legislation pending. Why? Because it threatens their own identity. This is not a new thing. Cross-dressing, wearing the clothes of the other sex, is specifically cited as, quote, an abomination, unquote, in Deuteronomy. That's in the Hebrew Bible. Or Joan of Arc, who had a really amazing life, the thing that they wanted to execute her for was the act of dressing in male clothing. Boom. Even now, there are rules about how you have to dress your children or grandchildren for school, or adults for work, or anybody in the military. And these rules usually actively enforce gender stereotypes. So let me ask you that question again. When you were younger and perhaps had fewer limitations on your imagination, did you ever wonder what it would be like to live for a while as the opposite sex? You probably thought they had it easier than you did. Now, in a classic piece of immersion reporting, Nora Vincent left her job as a syndicated columnist to discover what it would be like to present as a man in specifically traditional men's spaces. Now, she got the idea, I think it was on Halloween, when she and a friend dressed up as men during a night on the town in East Village in New York City. And they noticed, she and her girlfriend, they noticed that people, especially men, did not look at them the same way that they normally did. Usually, she said, as a woman, men looked at you as you walked down from one end of the street to the other, the male gaze. But in drag, men looked briefly and then immediately they looked away. She writes, to look another man in the eye and hold his gaze is to invite conflict. To look away is to leave each man to his tiny sphere of influence, the small buffer of pride and poise that surrounds him. So she wanted to investigate this further. So she adopts a persona. Nora becomes Ned. She comes up with some 5 o'clock shadow, a little bit of beard stubble. She describes herself as being a bit of a butch lesbian, so it might make it easier for her to pass as a man. This is her thinking. So she wraps bands around her chest. She wears loose clothing. She changes her hairstyle, cuts it short. She works with a voice coach to keep her voice lower. And she decides she's going to check out what the hidden world of men is like in various parts of the country. And her experiment lasts for 18 months, a year and a half going underground. So the very first thing she does is she joins a men's bowling league, and then she asks a few women out on casual dates as a man. That apparently was a big eye-opener for her. So she enters a monastery for a time, and then finally, her last thing to do is she joins a New Age men's group. She's particularly interested in whether men will actually be emotionally vulnerable around each other or not. And all of this to get more of an inside look at the world of traditional men. And so she joins a bowling league in the Midwest, and it's her first encounter passing herself off as a man. She wasn't sure if she would be recognized, and if she was recognized right away, would she be in danger? She remembered the 1999 Academy Award movie, Boys Don't Cry, based on a true story of Brandon Teena, an American transgender man who was raped and murdered because he was a transgender man. That was it. So while it could be dangerous, Nora/Ned wanted to explore male friendship. She had the sense that it was different than female friendship, and so she joins a bowling league, and she experiences directly how that particular group of men uses fewer words than women, and about how men set up boundaries, but also how the guys in her bowling league accept others very simply, very pragmatically. These men say what they mean what they say. They are not as talkative as the women she knows, but they communicate just as much. She even went on a few casual dates with women. This, of course, was the most amusing part to me. She could not believe the amount of rejection she got when she asked girls out as she posed as a man. Rejection, rejection, rejection. And she learned that women are wary of men, and then the men feel they have to persist, which makes women wary. She says it's a wonder heterosexuals get together at all. She also became aware, as the men were willing to talk honestly, of how degraded and awful a relentless, humiliating sex drive could make you feel. So then she wanted to see what living in a men's-only situation was like. You know, a place that she would normally be forbidden from entering. So she joins a monastery for a retreat, a long retreat. And what she learns about is the subtle insistence on the emotional distance that is required there. They always seem to be worried, these studious monks, always worried about emotional intimacy with the other monks. The emotional intimacy that could lead to something else. Even though the monks were spiritually intense and very dedicated, she found the avoidance of vulnerability, the avoidance of emotional intimacy to crush the human spirit. And in her travels through these men's worlds, she learned quite a bit. She learned that male privilege wasn't quite how it seemed to her before. For example, one thing, she learned that when people see weakness in a woman, they want to help out. And when they see weakness in a man, they want to crush it. She saw how many men had their masculinity tied to their jobs. If they were out of work, they were somehow less manly. To be a man, in the traditional sense, is to be a provider, to be a protector. And so for many men, the loss of a job means a certain loss of manhood. That's not the way it should be. For feminism to be truly successful, she decided, it's not enough to liberate women. Men must be liberated as well. Toward the end of her masquerade, she joined a New Age men's group, and she saw what is a dark and deep wound for many men. The wounds between father and son. Yes, that one. She saw the curse of too much emotional distance between fathers and sons handed down through the generations, and she saw how much men need brotherly love, care, and affection, and how rarely most of them seem to get it. For some of the men, it was an accomplishment to realize they even had feelings, since they'd been buried for so long. And she realized that her idea that everyone could express their emotions was a highly privileged, largely feminine point of view. Men wanted emotional tenderness, but to show vulnerability. To show vulnerability as a man means to show weakness in some circles. To be emotionally intimate with other men, that's going to be risky. You're going to be perceived as being gay. And then there's always the fact that other men, they can be dangerous to you. Nora writes, as a guy, you had to be at your full height and in possession of your faculties when in close proximity to other men. In the end, Nora Vitson came to realize that her masquerading as Ned might not be that difficult for actual men to understand. Nora was fully aware in her year-and-a-half journey, fully aware that she was wearing a mask, a persona. She was wearing a disguise. And so she was very aware of who she was and who was around her. And she was hyper-aware of these things and couldn't really talk about it. She was fully aware of gender, fully aware of her mask, and felt she couldn't talk about it. She says, I passed in a man's world, not because my mask was so real, but because the world of men is a masked ball. Only in my men's group, she writes, did I see masks removed and scrutinized, and only then did I know that my disguise was the one thing I had in common with every other man in the room. When Nora Vincent began her journey passing as a man, she thought of freedom, of being unafraid, of being loud, of being able to stand with her legs wide apart. But the reality was more clamped down than that. Someone, she says, someone is always evaluating your manhood. It starts when we are boys, as we were talking earlier in the service. She says the straitjacket of the male role is that you're discouraged from being a complete person. Instead, you get to be what's expected of you. Of course, you only get to be what is expected of you. That can be true for all of us, but only if we let it. We are born, we get assigned a gender, we grow up, we live. Hopefully, we consciously get to choose our gender and our gender expression. We get to choose. Except that this choice is being threatened in state houses all over the country. And progressive congregations like this one welcome us as we are becoming, and as we truly want to be. This is a key to the Unitarian Universalist affirmation, that fourth one that got mentioned earlier, of a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. So let us remember the words of the UU minister, Wayne Arneson. Take courage, friends. For the way is often hard, the path is never clear, and the stakes are very high. Take courage, for deep down, there is another truth. You are not alone. Let us be glad and take courage and be together for each other. Amen.